Welcome to the September 2025 edition of What Tim Read This Month. This is an offshoot of the Edgar Burroughs podcast, which is currently on hiatus, although I have an important announcement about that at the end of this video. And this is just a list of the books and brief reviews of all the books I have read in September of 2025. Now we start with Strike Force 7 by Ian MacAlister. Now, when the wife and the stepdaughter of a rich American are kidnapped in Morocco, a mercenary named Earl Gerald is hired to rescue them. Now, Gerald recruits 5 additional warriors. He also finds it necessary to bring along a woman reporter because she has a contact that might be able to lead them to the rebel leader who has masterminded the kidnapping. This is a fun novel, especially during the extended climax in which Gerald and several others have to knife some guards and sneak into the rebel camp to get the women, knowing that it's only a matter of time before the gunfire begins. This, in turn, forces them to shoot their way out. There's a lot of running, machine gun fire, barrages of grenades, all sorts of cool stuff. It's one of the best action sequences I've read in a long time. The characterizations are strong. I especially like the way the woman reporter is handled. She's not a warrior, but there is a good legitimate reason to have her on the team, and her experience as a reporter in various war zones means that Gerald knows she'll keep her head in dangerous situations. Her conversations with Gerald also help humanize him, making him seem like a real person rather than just the designated hero. So Ian MacAlister, I know that's a pen name, and I've forgotten the name of the actual author, his real name, but the books he wrote under the name Ian MacAlister are really books that need to be brought back into print. I've read at least one other, which was also excellent. Next, we get into a graphic novel / history book, The Mythmakers by Hendrix. This is a brilliant examination of the friendship between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and how they influenced one another and or often disagreed with each other. The book works as a dual biography and an examination of the literary and Christian influences that shaped both men. The latter part of the book discusses their differences in approaching how to write fantasy that was a factor, though not the only factor, in cooling their friendship. The art is great. The characters of Mr. Lion and the Wizard, who are our guides through this tale of 2 great writers, have fun personalities in their own right. If you have any interest at all in the work of either of these 2 great writers, this is a book that's really a must-read. Next, we come to the Radioactive Camel Affair by Peter Leslie. This is one of the 23, I think it was, paperbacks that were published while the TV show was on the air in the 1960s. And in this one, Solo and Ilya are assigned to find some stolen uranium-235. The trail takes them to Sudan, where they discover that Thrush is using a faction of rebels in southern Sudan to build a secret missile base. This is actually a pretty good spy novel, and it has a great climactic action scene. But it doesn't feel like a Man from U.N.C.L.E. story. It delves too much into real-life politics, and it lacks the tongue-in-cheek elements that even the more serious Uncle episodes always contained. I think it's possible, and this is just a theory, I have nothing to back this up, I think it's possible that the author was hired to write an Uncle novel and took an unpublished spy story he had written, changed the name, inserted Thrush as the main villain, and called it a day. Once again, it's not badly written. It is a good spy novel, but it just doesn't quite feel like it belongs in the Uncle universe. If you dive into it while expecting a more generic spy story, though, it can be enjoyed. And on a personal note, I've been to South Sudan a half dozen times on short-term missionary trips. Reading something written in 1966 that describes the Muslim North trying to wipe out the Christian/pagan South and other examples of violence in the country, and well, all I could think was not much just changed in 6 decades, has it? Next was 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City. This is based in an alternate world that in turn is based on the late Roman Empire. The capital city is besieged by a huge army who wants to slaughter the entire population. The military's been wiped out, with the exception of a regiment of engineers. There's very little food and few military supplies. And Orhan, the commander of the engineers, is a former slave and a foreigner who's looked on with contempt by many of the citizens. But Orhan might be the city's only slim hope. With a mixture of cleverness and targeted dishonesty, he mounts a defense, knowing that each small victory he wins buys the city perhaps another day of existence. He steals the royal seal from the comatose emperor and uses it to make deals with two powerful criminal factions. He uses what little money is in the treasury reminted into less pure form so that it can be stretched out longer as he pays workers. He introduces innovations in catapult and trebuchet designs that decimate enemy formations. The book combines great characters with suspense, bouts of intense action, and a steady stream of wry humor that tells an exciting story, while it also satirizes bureaucracy, prejudice, and human nature in general. It's a really fun tale. Next, I read a couple of graphic novels. The All Winners, Golden Age All Winners Marvel Masterworks, Volume 1. This reprints the first 4 issues of All Winners comics, published by Timely, one day to become Marvel Comics, in 1941 and 42. Each story includes a Captain America story. Each issue includes a Captain America story, a Human Torch story, and a Submariner story. Second-tier heroes also get some solo adventures. Black Marvel and Angel in the first issue, then the Destroyer and the unfortunately named Whizzer in the next 3. They're all fun stories, though the Captain America tales suffer a little after the first 2 issues when Simon and Kirby jumped ship to DC, and someone else was doing those tales. As was typical with many superhero stories from the Golden Age, there's instances of fuzzy story logic or the use of coincidence to move the plots along. But that's really just part of the charm of the Golden Age. Superhero comics were still in their formative years, after all. What's most notable is that the Axis powers are the bad guys in pretty much every story. And this is important because most of these issues were printed before the U.S. entered World War II. Timely Comics was presenting the Nazis and the brutal Japanese government as villains even before we were personally involved in the war. They were recognizing the Axis as an evil that must eventually be confronted while most of the country was still isolationist. And I think that's pretty awesome. Next, I read the Epic Collection Volume 2 of The Master of Kung Fu. And by this point in the series, the Master of Kung Fu had fully evolved into the mixture of martial arts action, pulp villainy, science fiction, and espionage that really made it a unique book. Shang-Chi and Black Jack Tar were now regularly accompanied by MI6 agents Lee Ko-woo, who's also Shang's love interest, and Clive Reston, implied to be James Bond's son and Sherlock Holmes' grandnephew. The stories are usually multi-part epics, with this particular volume ending in a long tale that culminates on a space station, with Shang and Reston rushing to stop Fu Manchu from blowing the moon out of orbit. Events leading up to that moment include ambushes, assassinations, double agents, betrayals, and civil war between Fu's minions and the minions of his equally evil daughter. It's all great stuff, putting the protagonist through the ringer both physically and emotionally, and it's all highlighted by great artwork and great fight scenes. Next, we have Tarzan and the Golden Lion. This novel actually gives you 2 stories for the price of 1. On the way home from the adventure recounted in the previous novel, in Tarzan the Terrible, Tarzan finds and adopts an orphaned lion cub. The lion, trained to obey Tarzan, grows up into a huge adult. The book has 2 interconnecting storylines. One involves the fact that World War I has depleted the Greystoke family fortune, so Tarzan leaves on an expedition to visit the treasure vaults of Opar. The lion escapes and follows him, showing up in time to take part in the various adventures Tarzan will be encountering. Now, one of the storylines that split off from this involves a group of greedy European adventurers whom themselves want to raid the vaults of Opar. The other involves La, the queen of Opar, and Tarzan's efforts to look after her after a cruel high priest usurps her power. The European group includes an actor who's impersonating Tarzan. This leads to confusion and mistaken identities in a story arc in which the Europeans all demonstrate chronic backstabbing syndrome. And while this is unfolding, Tarzan and Law escape Opar and end up in a land ruled by intelligent guerrillas, involving Tarzan in a slave revolt to overthrow these cruel taskmasters. With the help of his pet lion, he takes care of business there and returns to his home territory, where he's soon enmeshed in the fallout of the shenanigans of the Europeans and an increasingly insane fake Tarzan. Along the way, Jane is captured, and Tarzan believes her dead for a time. This is the second time in the last 3 books he mistakenly believes he's a widower. The world building Tarzan does with the guerrilla civilization is fun. It's not his most intricate example of world building, but it still gives that portion of the story a unique flavor. There is, of course, plenty of fights, pitched battles, betrayals, and plot twists to keep the story moving at a lightning pace. And the Golden Lion, Jad Balja, is a wonderful addition to the Tarzan mythos. Then I read what is the 5th book in the Chet and Bernie story, A Fistful of Collars by Spencer Quinn, a series that is of private eye novels that is narrated by the private eye's dog, Chet. And in this one, Bernie is hired by the mayor's office as a sort of troubleshooter for a big-budget movie that's being shot in the area. He soon finds that he has more than enough trouble to deal with, and he discovers he needs to solve both the years-old cold case murder and 2 more recent murders. The mystery's a little bit weaker than in the first 4 volumes, but it's still good. Chet, Bernie's dog, is still a wonderful narrator. The author thoroughly understands the love shared by a man and his dog. And if the mystery's a little weak, it does allow more insight into Bernie's motivations, in which he's driven more by compassion and his personal moral code than by money. The climax is very good, and an intense action scene as Bernie and Chet face off against a knife-wielding murderer and the murderer's very large dog is just great. And after the bad guys find it's a mistake to underestimate just how good Chet and Bernie are at taking down bad guys while taking care of each other. The next book was Why Didn't They Ask Evans by Agatha Christie. This is really a very entertaining Christie one-shot mystery. It's one that doesn't feature her regular protagonists. A man falls to his death in an apparent accident and bursts out an apparent non sequitur, "Why didn't they ask Evans?" before giving up the ghost. The 2 protagonists, who realize something is amiss even after the death is officially ruled an accident, are likable, intelligent, and fun to hang out with. Christie injects a lot of humor into the story while still constructing a solid mystery with a very satisfying resolution. Next, we jumped ahead from the 1930s to the 1970s with Crime Campaign, featuring The Amazing Spider-Man by Paul Kupperberg, part of the Marvel novel series that was published in the late 70s. This is the 8th out of 11. I'm kind of sad that I'm almost done with this series. They are just fun novels. And this one is a well-written superhero novel which thrusts the web-slinger into the middle of a gang war. The Kingpin and a consortium of other gang leaders has kidnapped the daughter of a famous Walter Cronkite-like anchorman. And the idea is to force the man to run for mayor, and if he wins, essentially hand the city over to the criminals. But Silvermane, the other top leader of organized crime in New York, is planning a double-cross. Also, a fake Spider-Man is showing up at the anchorman's rally and threatening the man's life. The real Spider-Man has to figure out what's going on, stop his evil twin, and also figure out why his new girlfriend is lying to him about being J. Jonah Jameson's niece and persistently asking where Peter Parker gets all those great Spidey photos. It all culminates in a finale in Silvermane's mansion, with thugs shooting at each other, Silvermane unwisely firing explosive bullets at Kingpin, and Spider-Man caught in the middle of it all. It really is fun, with the author effectively catching the personalities of the various characters while moving the story along at a brisk pace. I read The Horrors of Mars by Clark Ashton Smith. This is 4 novellas set on Mars, which, according to Clark Ashton Smith, is not a nice place to visit. The Planet Entity is not, the first novella, The Planet Entity, is not Smith's best. The plot for this one was actually submitted to Wonder Stories magazine by a reader as part of a contest, with Smith just then given the job of writing the actual story. And it's not bad, but it doesn't generate the horrific atmosphere that is normally one of Smith's strong points. It just kind of plods along until it comes to an unsatisfying ending. Dweller in the Gulf and The Vaults of Yo Vombus, the next two novellas, were both rewritten before publication in a way that Smith didn't care for. This book features both the original and the published versions, so the unrewritten and the rewritten versions, allowing us to see that Smith was right, by golly, in both cases. The original pre-edited versions just drip with an atmosphere of horror and dread that the rewrites diluted. These original versions of these two novellas are Clark Ashton Smith at his best. The last novella, Voltham, is Smith's last Mars story, and though not quite as good as Vaults or Dwellers, it gives us an alien menace that would fit perfectly into Lovecraft's Cthulhu cycle. It's still a good story. Then it should be noted, by the way, that Vaults, Dwellers, and Voltham are all set in the same version of Mars. It really is a planet you might want to avoid. Maybe go to Venus instead. And finally for this month, for Sumerian September, where you were obligated to read something by Robert E. Howard during the month, I read Three-Bladed Doom, one of my favorite of his adventure stories, either a long novella or a novel, depending on how you want to categorize it. I consider it a short novel, so I can count it as one of the books I read. I've read it multiple times because it's just a fantastic adventure story, and I was happy to revisit. Francis Xavier Gordon, otherwise known as El Borak, is an adventurer active in Afghanistan in the early 20th century. In this story, which is his longest adventure, he infiltrates a city of assassins who have been attempting, and sometimes succeeding, to kill rulers of nearby countries to destabilize the entire region and make it ripe for taking over. This short, fast-paced novel covers only about 2 days, and it's an action-packed 2 days. Gordon gets into multiple fights with either guns or bladed weapons. There's a girl to rescue, an evil ruler who needs killing, and at one point, a very unusual and dangerous creature to slay. In the end, Gordon and a few allies are trapped in a tower, while an even larger battle takes place nearby. But if Gordon can't fight his way out of trouble, he'll think his way out of trouble, and then jump right back into trouble. When Gordon joins that last battle, we are presented with a magnificently brutal and bloody combat scene. There's a few too many coincidences used to move the plot along, but the adventure is so much fun overall that doesn't really bother me. Now, that's what I've finished reading. What am I currently reading? Well, the book I'm reading is Samuel Pepys and His Books, which is a history of what people read in Restoration England. And, I just figure it's a fun book, and also I can get some points as a book nerd by reading a book about book nerds. Now, via the serial reader on my app, which sends me like one chapter a day, I'm reading Escape to Tomorrow, the second of what I think was either 3 or 4 novelizations of episodes of the TV series from the 70s, Planet of the Apes TV series, by George Alec Effinger. The 2 and short story anthologies I'm currently reading are The Return of Sherlock Holmes, because it's never bad to revisit the original canon, and the Swords and Sorceries, edited by L. Sprague de Camp, which is an excellent selection of sword and sorcery stories. As usual, I always read a short story or two in between novels to, as I so arrogantly phrase it, cleanse my literary palate, and these are the 2 books I'm choosing stories from to do that at the moment. And my yearly read-through of the Bible started a bit late because my time in the Word through most of 2025 was doing studies of specific books. So I've started this New American Standard version of a daily reading Bible, and I won't be able to mark that off as read until sometime next year. But that is my time in God's Word each day right now. And my important announcement to make is that the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast is coming off hiatus. If all goes as planned, then about the middle of October, we will be recording an episode on Edgar Rice Burroughs' novel, The Moon Maid, and we'll probably be visiting the entire trilogy over the course of successive episodes. So I appreciate everybody's patience in the time we have been off the air. We will be back soon, and I will also, just because I enjoy doing them, and I do seem to have built up a small but appreciative audience for these What I've Read videos, I will keep continuing to do them at the end of each month as well. So everybody, thank you for listening, and we will be back with an Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast episode before the month is over.